Hello, and welcome to I Am Not For Everyone, the podcast for those looking to release shame, heal from trauma, and feel really, really good being their fully expressed, authentic selves. My name's Dr. Lee, and I am a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner and a certified clinical trauma professional, as well as a mom, wife, and a human being navigating the world with complex PTSD. Season 1 of this podcast came about because I was tired of spending decades living in a shame-filled, trauma-laden body and brain. And after doing a lot of work and learning how to return to a safe, grounded place in my life, I knew it was time for me to take my experience in education and use my voice to unsilence myself, to release the leftover shame, and to give others permission to do the same. On season 2 of this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my experience in education. But even more importantly, I'm going to be bringing on some incredible guests who are going to unsilence themselves. They're going to share their own stories of trauma, shame, and their journeys to healing, resiliency, and self-acceptance. While I believe these episodes will be deeply impactful, I do want to add a disclaimer that we're going to be talking about some potentially triggering topics. So please take the invitation to pause or skip or fast forward on any episode, and to treat yourself gracefully and kindly after each time that you listen. Let's dive in. Hey, y'all. So today, as always, but just as a reminder, before we get started, making sure that you feel like you're in a good headspace, a good body space to be able to listen and interact with the content today. And also, check in with yourself for a second. Do you have water? Are you comfortable? My people get tired of hearing this, but I'm like, are you watered? Are you fed? Are your basic needs met right now? Do you have what you need in order to be able to benefit from listening to / watching this? If so, great. If not, you can keep watching while you go get those things. But just really encouraging you to take care of yourself. Make sure you're in a good space before we get started. If you're on with me live, say hi so I can say hi back. If you're watching the replay, #replay. And I am honestly had to do a little bit of self-grounding, protective work around this topic this week. It's very interesting that this topic is coming up this week because I just experienced this past weekend and or had a realization around trauma reenactment this last weekend that was pretty big and kind of there was a lot of emotion and a lot of feeling tied into it. And so I was like, oh, I need to be gentle with myself as I teach this. It's really interesting being somebody who talks about trauma, who teaches trauma, who coaches on trauma, who does all these things. You know, there has to be a lot of grounding, a lot of restoration, a lot of self-protection work that goes into that to make sure that I am able to show up and serve in the way that I really want to. So I want to share a little bit about what happened with me, just to normalize this for all of you. I'm really big on normalization, and really big on being very transparent about the experience that I've had and what prompts me, what motivates me to also do this work is a lot of my own experience. So I want to talk about trauma reenactment. And it's like I said, it's just so serendipitous that this is coming up right now because this has actually been coming up for a lot of my clients this week. So trauma reenactment, what is trauma reenactment? What do I mean when I say that? What does it involve? And what does it look like? Why does it happen? And how do we move out of a space where we reenact traumatic experiences? So trauma reenactment is what it sounds like. It is where we have stored trauma in our body. We have past painful experiences that for whatever reason, when they occurred, we felt helpless. And so we weren't able to move. We weren't able to take action in the moment against the threat. And all of the chemicals, all of the neurotransmitters, all of that experience was misunderstood, was misprocessed by our brain. And B, all of those chemicals got stored in our body. So there's a couple of things happening. One, our brain isn't functioning in a way that is helpful for us to process information at that time of helplessness when that trauma occurred. And also our body is not able to mobilize and move and get those chemicals that were released out. And so it creates a remembrance in the body and in the brain. It creates dysfunction in the brain about how we move forward and how we approach things from that moment on. So when we reenact trauma, what we are doing is we are repeating a pattern that our nervous system has learned, and our brain is functioning in a way that it has learned how to function, but is not optimal functioning for someone who does, like, that would be present in someone who didn't have these significant traumatic experiences. So trauma reenactment is the body repeating a pattern, putting itself into situations in which it can repeat the pattern to try to resolve the pattern. Okay. So this can happen in one of two ways. All right. One way that trauma reenactment occurs is not conscious, right? It's subconscious. One way that trauma reenactment occurs is conscious. So a lot of people who join the military, who become nurses, who become caring professionals, teachers, educators, do so consciously because they experienced situations in which they were helpless. They experienced situations where they saw someone get hurt. They saw someone not be protected. Police officers, first responders fall in this too. They saw something happen, or they experienced something themselves where they were helpless, right? And they then consciously choose to go into a profession where they can do something about the thing, right? We talked a little about this in fight. Sometimes this can be fight energy, right? This can be a fight trauma response. So for me, I ended up going into the nursing profession for a little bit of a different reason. I knew that I wanted to help people. I knew that I originally went in to be a midwife, and I've told the story in here, but originally went in to be a midwife and then had a really exciting experience in the emergency department that, like, my body was like, oh, we recognize this feeling. We feel threatened and excited and exhilarated and alive, but like we're actually able to do something about it, right? And so subconsciously, my body went, oh yes, let's choose this over midwifery. Let's choose acute care nurse practitioner over midwifery. Let's put ourselves in situations where we can save people from death and dying. None of this was conscious at that time. None of this was conscious. I did not know that's why I was choosing what I was choosing. I went into nursing consciously, knowing that I wanted to help people, knowing that I wanted to help moms have a better birth experience. But I had no idea when I then switched roles why I wanted what I wanted, right? I just knew that it felt good. What I had a massive revelation about this weekend on the therapy couch with my amazing trauma-informed therapist was that we have been working on some past traumas that I experienced, and we uncovered birth trauma, which I didn't remember, obviously, I was a baby, but I didn't remember the story of what happened when I was born. And my mother doesn't even know entirely what happened, which also speaks to the trauma that she went through, right? But my heart either went into a life-threatening arrhythmia or stopped when I was born. And so I was separated from my mom for over 24 hours, wasn't picked up, held that entire time, and wasn't, was basically helpless, right, for those 24 hours. What we now know from a research perspective is like, that is a really big thing. If baby can't come out, get placed on mom's chest, have that bonding, have that attunement, have that co-regulation, that is a really big thing for nervous systems. We used to think that babies' nervous systems at that age didn't really matter. We used to think that babies didn't experience pain. We actually, up until the 1980s, used to do procedures on children, like painful procedures on children without any anesthesia whatsoever. just with paralytics. And what we're finding is like that was definitely not accurate. Babies in utero experience pain. They will recoil from painful stimuli or things that they think are going to be painful. So our nervous system is already fully working and babies experience pain in the womb. And so as we were working through this, we were talking through some other pieces of my past and talking about some other things that happened to me when I was a very young child with trauma and being helpless. When I was around 9 years old, another thing happened. And so we're connecting all of these dots, right? And I'm looking at my career as a nurse going, oh my goodness. The reason why all of my trauma resurfaced, all of my like discomfort and all of my symptoms, all of my emotional flashbacks came back at the earlier part of this year is because that is when I left nursing. That is when I left being a nurse. Now, being a nurse practitioner, taking care of 40 patients at a time during a pandemic, and your patients are immunocompromised, they have no immune systems, it's very, very stressful. There was a lot of distress. There was a lot of burnout going on. And what I didn't know was that my nervous system had gotten in a very specific pattern. My nervous system had gotten used to the chemicals, the adrenaline and the norepinephrine getting dumped into my body during work, the entire shift. Right? And I worked 20 hour shifts. My body had gotten used to that over 10 to 12 years. That was how we had gotten, my nervous system had gone into a pattern. And so when I left nursing and there was no longer that stimulus, my body kind of went through withdrawal. And this is why we participate in trauma reenactment, is because our body is used to being bathed. It's used to getting those chemicals. It's used to getting that activation. It's used to being hypervigilant. It's used to having this experience. And so when we take that human whose nervous system has been primed, whose brain function has literally changed due to trauma, and we put them in nice, calm, peaceful, serene settings, that is actually very, very, very uncomfortable, more uncomfortable than the painful situations that this person was in before. And so the reason why I started having so much more dysregulation to the point that I ended up going back to therapy, that I ended up like really getting a lot more mental health support, was because of this, was because I had taken away the thing that my nervous system had in a way gotten addicted to, which was the high stress, high pressure, literal life or death situation that I was walking into on a consistent basis. But in that situation, I had control. So hear me in this. Trauma reenactment is about taking control in situations that are similar to the situations that you were in when you were helpless. Taking control in situations that are similar to the ones that you experienced when you were helpless. This is one form of trauma reenactment. So some ways that people play out trauma reenactment, right? Being in a helpless situation where they were hurt, where they were stuck, where they froze, where they were immobilized, where they were helpless, where they could not get out. A lot of us turn to things that produce a lot of endorphins. What are some things that produce a lot of endorphins? Drugs, high-risk sports, dangerous careers, right? Relationships where there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of unpredictability, right? You think about all of the places where someone might place themselves, that gives a lot of adrenaline. And also, this is why I have a little bit of a different spin on addiction, which I don't even really like talking about. If you'll notice in all of the lives that I do, when you hear me teach, I will either say it off the bat or correct myself if I hear myself use language that isn't helpful around this. Is like, we never assign habits as character traits. So if you come into my space and you say, hi, Lee, my name is X and I'm an alcoholic or a recovering alcoholic, I'll say, okay, hi, X, you are somebody who has a habit of using alcohol in a way that doesn't serve you. There's, if you say, hi, I'm an addict, I'll say, no, you're somebody with an addiction. I'm depressed. No, you're somebody who has symptoms of depression, right? So this is very similar to someone who has habits of addiction, right? Of this withdrawal procurement, withdrawal reward system. People who have nervous systems that have gone through trauma oftentimes feel uncomfortable and will seek out risky or addictive or high endorphin states at the expense of connection with others, at the expense of maintaining relationships, at the expense of staying in accord with their own morals and values. And this is the really hard thing about trauma reenactment. This is the really hard, this is, I think, the hardest thing about trauma reenactment is that it is a self-perpetuating cycle, right? Trauma reenactment is a self-perpetuating cycle because as I try to pull myself out of situations where I am reenacting my trauma, like I just talked about me as a nurse, as I pulled myself out of practicing at the bedside, my symptoms, my nervous system became more and more dysregulated. And so when our nervous systems are very dysregulated, when they are feeling very threatened, whether there is a threat or not, my body's primary goal is to get out of feeling that way. And we've talked about all of the trauma responses and the threat responses, the fight, the flight, the fawn, the freeze, right? If my body feels like it is in a consistent state of threat, I can try to be as cognizant and as intentional as I can and act in a morally aligned way where I maintain my integrity. And I just don't have enough mental real estate to be able to maintain that all the time. There's going to become a time where my conscious mental energy is not going to be enough to overcome the subconscious urges to get out of what we are experiencing as threat. And this is the really hard part, is that the things that we are experiencing as threat to other people don't feel threatening, right? The things that we are experiencing as extremely uncomfortable do not feel uncomfortable to other humans. So it's hard to explain to another human when you're sitting on the couch or you're on vacation and everything's nice and relaxed and calm. And you're like, I'm restless. I need to go do something. I need to get up. I can't handle this, right? I need to go do something exciting. I need to go do something, whatever. That is dysregulation. By the way, a lot of this also might sound like ADHD. ADHD and trauma brains have some similar overlaps in the brain structures that are impacted, that are different. And so that restlessness, that impulsivity, that inattention, this is why in a lot of clinical settings, they are starting to do trauma surveys, which is a whole thing in and of itself, if that's actually trauma informed or not, but they're starting to do trauma surveys when people come in with either a diagnosis of anxiety or ADHD, like a tentative diagnosis, because anxiety, ADHD, and PTSD/trauma reenactment, all of these things look similar. They all have to do with the sympathetic nervous system. They all have to do with the limbic system in our brain, the mammalian system in our brain, how it talks to the other systems in our brain. So this is hard, right? This is why we judge the person who is clean for 6 months and then goes back to using whatever their drug or substance of choice was, right? This is why we judge the woman or the person who goes back and gets back into the dysfunctional or the abusive relationship over and over. Or we judge the person who, who continues returning back to homelessness. We judge the person who just can't get it together. And what I want you to hear is that that's not always due to trauma. That can be due to other things as well. But trauma is a significant impetus behind this. It's a significant reason why some people just can't, quote unquote, get it together. And as a human who at times just couldn't get it together, there is a lot of shame that gets wrapped up in trauma reenactment. Something called moral injury occurs, right? So if I am having a significant level of activation in my body, right? If I am feeling significantly dysregulated and I am somebody who is really big on being honest. Honesty is very important to me. And I promised my partner that I'm not going to use a substance again, right? And more so than that, I'm not going to lie about using it again. And my partner said, you use this one more time, you're out. Our relationship's over. And I'm experiencing that really, really high level of dysregulation. And my willpower, my conscious brain at some point just can't continue to overpower that desire to do that thing. I'm going to end up violating my integrity. I'm going to end up violating my morals. I'm going to break my promise to my partner. I'm going to use that substance. And then I'm either going to have to lie about it, or I'm going to have to come to them and lose the thing that I want, which is to stay in a relationship with my partner. So that creates that is moral injury. We're injuring ourselves at this moral level, causing ourselves to do things that don't align with our morals and values, and then experiencing a significant amount of shame around that. And that shame further dysregulates the nervous system. Because one of the things that's required, that's really helpful as humans to have a regulated nervous system, we're not reptiles. We are mammals. We are built for connection. We are built for comfort and love. And one of the best ways to regulate your nervous system is to feel loved and connected to somebody else, to feel seen and heard and witnessed by someone else. And if my behavior that I just went through is something that I feel deep shame around, and it's also going to cut me off from the very humans that I'm trying to stay connected to, then this is going to create even further separation between them and me, which is going to cause even further nervous system dysregulation. And this is why addiction, this is why trauma reenactment, this is why all of these things are so complicated, is because they self-perpetuate. They are self-fulfilling cycles. And so, how do we get out of that? How do we get out of that? Because it's also not the responsibility necessarily of the person on the other end of this in a relationship with somebody who's experienced a lot of trauma, someone who is dysregulated a lot of the time. It's not necessarily their responsibility to stick around and to have to be in relationship with somebody that it can feel hard to be in relationship with. So what do we do about that? One of the things, the reason why I labeled myself as an anti-shame coach is because if we can get underneath the shame, if we can start normalizing the fact that there are individuals out there, way more than we have been diagnosed with this, there are a lot of individuals out there that are experiencing nervous system dysregulation and who are reenacting trauma from a place of trying to heal. And we can actually decrease the amount of shame these people are feeling around how they are showing up, around their behavior. If we can stop characterizing people by their behavior and instead start characterizing them by, okay, I actually see you as a human. I see the human you're trying to be, and I see that it's hard to be that human with the nervous system that you're living with right now and with the habits that you have created around that nervous system, right? If we can start to interact with people in this way, if we can give people what I've talked about in here, attunement, if we can give people love, connection, and unconditional acceptance. And I think I've talked about it on these lives, but acceptance is not the same thing as approval, right? Acceptance is basically taking something at face value for what it's worth, for what it is, without judgment. Approval is saying that something is okay. Acceptance is saying, yep, that happened. So a lot of what a lot of times we think people are looking for when they come to us and say, hey, I messed up. Hey, I did this thing wrong. Most people aren't looking for approval. They know that what they did, they are already most likely judging themselves for what they've done. They're not coming to you to have you tell them that it's okay that they did what they did. They're coming to you to have them for you to be able to be like, yep, I see that happened. What do you want to do about it? How do we move forward from this? A lot of times when we are on the receiving end of somebody's behavior who is reenacting trauma, it can be really, 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 really hard not to judge, because we also all have our own past painful experiences. And by the way, we'll talk about trauma bonding at some point. Most of the time, when we get into intimate relationships with people and we don't know about our own past painful learning, we haven't healed or processed through that, we attract people who help us reenact our past traumas. If you experienced a lot of abandonment and rejection as a child, do you think your nervous system is going to be more drawn, more attracted to a person who shows up for you every single moment of the day and who never makes you feel abandoned and who always makes you feel seen and safe and supported? Or do you think that your nervous system is actually going to be more attracted to somebody who's likely to abandon and reject you again? You guys probably know the answer to this. But if you haven't worked through that trauma, if you haven't worked through and processed that painful learning, your nervous system is looking for another chance, is looking for a situation in which it can reenact and fix, quote unquote, fix the previous trauma. My nervous system wants to find a person, not my nervous system, but like I'm just saying as an example, this nervous system that experienced a father who abandoned and neglected them or who never approved of them, oftentimes will go find a boyfriend who's aloof and who doesn't give a lot of approval, who doesn't give a lot of compliments, who's kind of standoffish, and we're going to try to change him. We're going to try to change him. Or if this nervous system experienced a caregiver that didn't give them something, they're going to go find someone else that reminds them of this caregiver that they can try to fix, that they can play this pattern back out, but try to fix it this time around. And here's the problem with this, in case you can't already see it. The problem with this is that that's not how trauma reenactment works. The likelihood that you're going to actually be able to quote unquote fix, nobody can really fix anybody to begin with, but the likelihood that relationship is going to end up working out is very, very low. And the reason why most relationships, especially relationships that are really like from the beginning, very strong attraction, like, oh my gosh, we fell in love immediately. It was love at first sight, all these things. That's why these relationships, several months down the road, several years down the road, end up in very tenuous situations, is because we've gotten to the point that we recognize we can't fix this other human and they're not meeting our needs, because our need is to not be abandoned or rejected. And this person's primary way of dealing with threat is to abandon, is to leave, is to flee. when we think about kind of going back to caregiver, this is where a lot of trauma reenactment comes from, is from a caregiver perspective, because this is very confusing as a child. If we have, and I'll go back over, remember we have 3 things that we need from caregivers: limits, guidance, and nurturing. Boundaries, guidance, nurturing, in 5 main places: mental, emotional, spiritual, sexual, physical, right? So we have these 5 areas of caregiving in 3 main ways that we need in order to really grow up and establish very healthy boundaries for ourselves. And if I have a caregiver that is neglectful in one of those needs, or if I have a caregiver that is intrusive or hurtful in one of those areas, the problem with that is that my nervous system feels wounded by this human. I've experienced shame with this human. I've experienced a separation from myself with this human. And all of these chemicals, all of these body processes are happening. And I'm young enough that I don't have anyone else I can connect with. This person who is hurting me, and probably not even intentionally, but this person who is hurting me, or this person who is not meeting my needs, is the very person I'm going to turn back to try to get some comfort, right? And so we learn that the person who's hurting us is also the person who's comforting us. And so we oftentimes go back out and reenact that as well. We go back out and reenact that as well. And so we find people who both hurt us and comfort us. And what I want you to hear is that if you've ever been in a situation with somebody where they've hurt you, and then all of a sudden there's a sexual attraction again, right? You're with a partner, an intimate partner, and you guys are fighting, or everything is just feeling really awful. And then you start to work it out, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's sexual attraction there. And you carry out that act. And afterwards, you're kind of like, what the heck just happened, right? You've seen this in movies. You've seen this in movies where people who really don't like each other, or people who are having a very big fight, all of a sudden like jump on each other. And then afterwards, they're like, oh, should we have done that? Right? That is a bit of trauma reenactment. That is your body during that hurt phase, dumping endorphins in, dumping pain relieving, exciting chemicals in, and then you finding a way to discharge those chemicals in a very quote unquote pleasurable way. And so that pattern can get repeated as well. This is, and just a little, this whole talk is a trigger warning, but I want to add an extra one here. I remember when I was a little kid, not a little kid, but like an old, younger, and we would watch the show Cops, right? Anyone ever watch the show Cops? And there would be a domestic disturbance call, and the cops would show up, and the couple is just fighting and throwing things at each other and doing all the things, right? And then the cop would try to step in and break up the fight, and usually pull one of the partners out of the home. And all of a sudden that other partner would turn on the cop, right? And would be like, no, don't hurt him. Don't do that. Trauma reenactment. How do we notice that we're doing this? Right? How do we notice that we're in one of those things? Well, first of all, this is kind of what we've been talking about for the last several weeks, is noticing that you're activated, right? Noticing that you're activated. One of the times that I can tell that my body's itching for a little bit of trauma reenactment is when I'm like trying to rest and it feels very, very hard. And my body's like, oh, maybe we should go get a glass of wine, or like, maybe we should go, get up and like go do this thing. Or maybe, like, I know we already worked and we said we were going to be done, but like, I could just email this one client, or like, oh, let me distract myself with my phone. When I'm having trouble just sitting, when I'm having trouble just being, that is a cue that my nervous system is dysregulated and it wants to reenact something. So I have to be really conscious during those moments, because those are the moments I'll start a fight. Those are the moments that my nervous system's like, let's stir some stuff up just for funsies, right? I have to be very cognizant of that. And this comes back to noticing and practicing being in my body, because when I am get into situations of trauma reenactment, it is because I'm trying to escape, trying to externalize outside of my body to feel something different than I'm feeling right now. Also, if you're somebody who really loves tattoos, if you're somebody who really loves piercings, you're somebody who really loves to do things that are a little bit painful, right? That can also be a form of trauma reenactment. If you notice yourself having urges to do things that, and I don't want to say that they're self-mutilation in the way of like that they're necessarily bad. Tattoos aren't bad, piercings aren't bad, none of that's bad. But if you notice yourself having a desire for a little bit of pain, this is also your nervous system saying, hey, we need a fix. We are withdrawing from the stimuli that make us feel good, that make our nervous system feel more regulated. So dropping back in, practicing the 10-second protocol, noticing where the tension is in your body. Are you in a situation where the thing that you are doing or the people you are around or whatever is going on is activating? Are you at your mother? Are you at your in-laws, right? Are you surrounded by people that you don't normally like to be around or that you don't feel comfortable connecting with? Is your body physically uncomfortable? Are you really hot? Are you really tired? Are you really hungry? Are you really lonely? Dropping back in, practicing the easy method. Remember, like the 10-second protocol is the very beginning of the easy method, right? The 10-second protocol is we're going to tense up for 5 seconds. We're going to release for 5 seconds. We're going to notice the feelings in our body. We're going to come back into here because a lot of trauma disconnects us from our body. We don't even recognize that we're feeling uncomfortable. We just know we want to go, we just know we want to go get another tattoo. We just know we're feeling like really argumentative. We just know we really want another drink. We're not actually feeling the feelings in our body. We just know that we want to take action in some way that in consequence alleviates the feelings that we're not even able to necessarily acknowledge. So that 10-second protocol, dropping back in and actually practicing feeling your body is huge. And then from there, figuring out what is triggering me right now. Is it the fact that I don't have any stimulation? Okay, so do I need to go meditate or do I need to find a healthy way to move this through? Do I need to move? Do I need to take some action, but in a way that's going to avoid moral injury? Do I need to move in a way that's going to avoid moral injury? There is a lot of debate in the trauma-informed community around whether like getting into marathon running or getting into weightlifting really hardcore, like if that is acceptable, even if it's a form of trauma reenactment, right? My argument is this, or my viewpoint, I guess, would be is this. If we are consciously choosing something that helps us discharge the feelings in our body in a way that does not cause moral injury, go for it. You want to go run 5 miles? Great. You want to go run 16 miles and blow out your knee and not eat anything for the rest of the day? You want to restrict your calorie intake? You want to do all of those things? Different concept, right? You want to consciously choose to have a glass of wine to get in the bubble bath and to listen to some music that feels really good versus you want to just kind of go into that escape route and go to the bar and slam back 6 shots. These are different experiences, right? So after you drop in, are you using the movement? Are you taking action from a place that allows you to really drop in, feel what you're feeling and move through that feeling? Or are you choosing an option that helps you go around the feeling? Are you choosing an option that allows you to not feel the feeling and escape from the feeling. Right? And this is subtle and this is nuanced, and it's going to be different for every single individual. So, heavy topic. But the cool part I will tell you is this. I kind of wanted to share the end part of my story is when I realized, when I had this huge epic moment on Sunday where I was like, oh, that job was trauma reenactment. The day I had that was also the year, right? A year to that day since I had left my job. It was a year to the day that I had left clinical practice, right? My body was remembering. My body was saying, and my body, the interesting thing was, my body wasn't freaking out because it was remembering how awful work was. My body was dysregulated, and I was having a ton of emotions and having a ton of feelings because I had told myself that at the 1 year mark, I would reconsider going back to clinical practice. And what my body was telling me in that moment was, you are not ready. We do not want that. That still feels dangerous and threatening. In fact, that doesn't feel good anymore. Entering back into that place where you used to reenact your feelings of helplessness and get out of that helplessness by being the savior, by being the person who got to come in and change lives and save the day. That doesn't feel good anymore because you have done so much work around regulating that going back into that is actually going to become dysregulating. That is not where you belong anymore. And my brain, my ego was being super cute and going like, oh, but if you leave clinical practice for more than a year, then no one's going to hire you ever again, or they're going to ask questions, or like basically my ego was saying to me, you're never going to get to be a nurse again if you don't go do this. And what was so helpful to recognize was that's not the truth. My brain was telling me an either or situation. Either you go back into the situation where you felt like you were suffering, where you will suffer, right? Or you give up this thing and you lose your identity and you lose your ability to like do the thing that you studied for 12 years for. And that was a black or white situation, right? Same thing with relationships, right? I either leave this person and never interact with them again, completely cut myself off from them, or I stay in a relationship with them and suffer. Those aren't your only two options. There's a lot of coaching, there's a lot of self-help, there's a lot of personal development out there that says that when it comes to trauma reenactment, it has to be black or white, and that's simply not the case. You're able to pick out the pieces and the parts of what happened in the past that aren't harmful, that still feel good, that don't activate your nervous system, that don't have that addictive property to them, and pull those forward with you into the present and keep those. So for me, I still get to be a nurse. I still get to act as a nurse practitioner, just not in the way that I used to. I get to run a whole institute. I get to run a whole institute helping people change their lives and change the lives of others by learning about how their past painful experiences affect them in the present and learning how to not keep dragging them into their future. I get to change lives like that. I get to volunteer. I get to speak at conferences. I get to be on boards of directors if I want. I get to guest lecture. I get to do lots of different things that are all under in the scope of being a nurse practitioner. I just don't have to be a bedside clinician anymore, and that's okay. And maybe one day I'll want to do that. But for now, that still feels a little bit traumatic, and I don't want to reenact that anymore. I found different ways of soothing my nervous system, and that's not the way for me anymore. So I want to just end on that note for anyone who's listening going, oh my gosh, like I feel like my career might actually be trauma reenactment. Okay, cool. Great. There are ways to tease out what's trauma and what's not. There are ways to tease out what is a escape response and what is a intentional response. There are ways to figure out how to show up in integrity and to stop committing moral injury in the work that you're doing or in the relationships that you're in, that without completely leaving or ending them or cutting them off. So that's beyond the scope of this conversation, and it's going to be a very individual journey. And what I want to say to you is just like, if that's a journey that you'd like to go on, if that's a journey where you'd like to figure those things out, I'm here. Reach out, DM us at the Institute. We would love to support you. And if you're not ready yet, that's also okay. Or if you're like, I don't think I'm reenacting trauma anywhere, fantastic. I'm so grateful that that is your experience. And also just know that there are people around you who are going through that experience. And so even having that lens, right? Having that lens, maybe this helps you understand the person in your family who is struggling with addiction. Maybe this helps you understand the friend that keeps going back to the partner who in your opinion isn't a good partner for them. Maybe this helps you understand the parent who continues to do things and participate in behaviors that you're just like, this is not healthy. Hopefully this helps you understand that and have a little bit more compassion for that and a little bit more awareness around it. So love you all. I will see you next week. Just a reminder, TRIP certification is open for enrollment. If that's something that you're interested in learning more about how to show up in a trauma-informed way, how to create safety for yourself, and then how to be able to externalize that and be trauma-informed towards others and create safe, supportive environments where you can be attuned, where you can offer unconditional acceptance, where you can really start living a life where you are not judging and you're seeking more to understand than you are to judge. If that's something that you desire, then we would love to have you. There are still partial scholarships available. The full scholarship option application is open through the 15th. If that is something that you would like to explore, that's for our people who really cannot feasibly make the partial scholarship work. So if that is where you are at, again, zero judgment. We would still love to have you. Please apply for that. And if you have any questions about the certification, please reach out and I will talk to you all next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about how you can help yourself and others release shame, heal from trauma, and create healthier, safer, more mutually beneficial relationships, I want to invite you to head to our website, institutefortrauma.com. At institutefortrauma.com, you'll find free resources, be able to connect to our free online community, and view our courses and trainings, including our foundational trauma-informed, psychologically safe certification, aka the TRIP certification. Head to institutefortrauma.com today to learn more.